Have you ever experienced anxiety with its effects on your health and mood? As if a raging river were flowing through you, carrying you away with its current. As if a dark shadow fell on your mind, clouding your thoughts and stealing your serenity. If the answer to these questions is yes, then you know well that uncomfortable and unwanted companion that sometimes creeps into our lives. But have you ever wondered if anxiety necessarily has to be an enemy? What if, instead of fighting it, we could learn to understand it and transform it into a precious ally? If you want to know how, follow this video to the end and don't miss the story of the shaman who taught you how to cure anxiety. I would learn to tame anxiety and navigate the waves of your mind, rediscovering emotional balance and inner peace. In this Zen story, full of Buddhist wisdom and hope, you will discover how anxiety is not a condemnation, but an opportunity to grow and learn more about yourself. But before continuing, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way you will be informed when we publish new content for your spiritual growth. Among the green hills of Japan, surrounded by an almost palpable quiet, stood an ancient Buddhist monastery. In the shade of a blossoming cherry tree, whose pink petals fell like delicate sleet, sat the elderly and wise monk Kio. His eyes shone with ancient wisdom, thanks to which he transmitted peace and serenity to the many who came to visit him. Next to him, a group of people, their faces lined with worry and anxiety, awaited his lesson on anxiety with anxious hope. Anxiety, my dear friends, Master Kio began in a calm, reassuring voice, is like a raging river flowing through our inner valleys. It can scare us with its strength, carry us away with its current, but if we learn to understand its course, we can transform it into a precious ally. A murmur of curiosity ran through the group. How could anxiety, the source of so much suffering, become an ally? The monk smiled with compassion, aware of the doubts that gripped his listeners. Imagine, he continued, a farmer who fears the arrival of torrential rains. If he ignores them, his fields will be flooded and his crops lost. But if instead he observes the clouds, he understands the direction of the wind and prepares adequately. The rains will not only not be a threat, but will become a source of life for his crops. Likewise, the master explained, anxiety should not be fought or repressed, but rather understood and managed. When you feel anxiety rising within you, he advised, don't judge it, don't resist it. Welcome her kindly, like an unexpected guest. Look at it carefully. Where does it come from? What is causing you concern? What thoughts and fears fuel you? Only after you understand the nature of your anxiety can you begin to deal with it wisely. Like a gardener pruning dead branches to grow new ones, Kio continued, learn to recognize the negative and destructive thoughts that fuel your anxiety. At that point, you will need to replace them with more positive and constructive thoughts, which nourish your mind and heart. And again, Master Kio taught them the power of conscious breathing. When you feel overwhelmed by anxiety, he suggested, close your eyes and focus on your breathing. Feel the air entering and exiting your nostrils, sense the movement of your chest and abdomen. Every breath is a new beginning, an opportunity to let go of the past and embrace the present. Then, the master invited the group to meditate under the cherry blossom tree. Let the beauty of the flowers and the tranquility of the place envelop you, he suggested. Pay attention to the sounds of nature, the birdsong, the rustle of the wind in the leaves. Feel the peace that surrounds you and let it permeate your being. As they meditated, cherry petals fell on them like delicate pink snow, enveloping them in an atmosphere of stillness and serenity. In that moment of profound connection with nature and with oneself, anxiety began to melt like snow in the sun, replaced by a sense of peace and inner calm. When they opened their eyes, the faces of the participants were radiant with a new light. They had learned that anxiety was not a condemnation, but an opportunity to grow and learn more about themselves. They had discovered that the key to defeating it was not fighting, but understanding, kindness, and inner peace. But to reinforce the concept and better understand how to deal with anxiety, Master Kio told them the legend of the fisherman and the salmon. Imagine, Master Kio began in a narrative voice, a skilled fisherman named Taro, who lived in a small fishing village on the coast of Japan. Taro was a man with a simple heart and a serene gaze, accustomed to sailing the waves of the sea with his rowing boat in search of the precious loot that his nets could capture. One day, as the sun shone high in the sky and the wind blew gently, Taro ventured out to sea, unaware of the storm that was approaching on the horizon. Dark clouds massed like menacing giants, the wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the waves swelled like liquid mountains. Taro, taken by surprise by the sudden fury of nature, found himself at the mercy of the storm. His little boat was being tossed by the waves like a toy, and fear gripped his heart. He tried to paddle against the current, to fight against the force of the storm, but it was like swimming against a rushing waterfall. Exhausted and desperate, Taro thought that his end was near, but just as he was about to succumb to despair, he saw a dim light in the distance that leaped through the clouds. With his eyes full of tears and his heart full of trepidation, he steered his boat towards that light, which turned out to be a lighthouse on a rocky island. Gathering the last of his strength, he managed to reach the island and save his boat. Exhausted and soaked, he collapsed on the beach, feeling the weight of the fear and anxiety that had assailed him during the storm. As he caught his breath, an old Buddhist monk approached him with a gentle smile. "Why are you so upset, young fisherman?" the monk asked in a calm voice. Taro told the monk his terrible experience at sea, the fear that had gripped him and the desperation he had felt. The monk listened carefully, nodding sagely. "The storm you faced at sea," the monk explained, "is similar to the anxiety that sometimes torments our hearts. It can be scary and destructive, just like the waves that threaten to swallow you." Taro looked at the monk with questioning eyes, eager to understand how he could overcome this fear that gripped him so much. "But just as you managed to reach the island and escape the storm," the monk continued, "you can learn to tame anxiety and find inner peace." And so the monk told Taro the legend of the fisherman and the salmon. Once upon a time there was a fisherman who used to catch salmon in the river that flowed near his village. One day, while he was fishing, a particularly large salmon got caught in his net. The fisherman, for the joy of the catch, began to pull the net with all his strength, without realizing that the salmon was still alive and suffering. The salmon, terrified at the prospect of being killed, began swimming desperately against the current, trying to free themselves from the net. But the more he tried, the more the net tightened him, and the more his pain increased. Just when he was about to succumb to despair, the salmon had an idea. Instead of continuing to swim against the current, he began to swim with it. Following the flow of the river, the salmon managed to free themselves from the net and return to the open sea. The story of the fisherman and the salmon teaches us a valuable lesson, the monk continued. When we face anxiety or fear, we don't have to fight against it like the salmon that swam against the current. Instead, we must learn to flow with them, to accept their presence without judging or condemning ourselves. Taro listened carefully to the monk's words and finally understood the wisdom contained in the legend. From that day on, whenever anxiety tried to overwhelm him, he remembered the story of the fisherman and the salmon. He learned to breathe deeply, to observe his thoughts without judgment, and to flow with the current of his emotions, just like the salmon that had found salvation by following the course of the river. Taro's story soon became known throughout the village. His fellow villagers, inspired by his transformation, began asking for his advice on how to deal with their anxieties and fears. And Taro, with his kindness and wisdom, guided them along the path of awareness and inner peace. And so the ancient fishing village was transformed into a place of serenity and harmony, where people lived in peace with themselves and with the world around them. All this thanks to the wisdom of the old monk and the fortitude of Taro, the fisherman who had learned to tame anxiety and navigate the waves of his mind with an open heart and a serene mind. But what does the story of Taro and Master Kio teach us? It teaches us that anxiety is not an enemy to be fought, but an opportunity to grow and get to know oneself better. Through understanding, kindness, and inner peace, we can learn to flow with anxiety and transform it into a precious ally for a more peaceful and fulfilling life. Taro's story is a fascinating metaphor for our struggle with anxiety. It teaches us that instead of resisting our negative emotions, we can learn to understand them, accept them, and flow with them. Just like the salmon that finds salvation by following the course of the river, we can find inner peace by allowing ourselves to be guided by wisdom and compassion. The story also reminds us of the importance of sharing and mutual support. When we face our difficulties together with kindness and understanding, we can create a more peaceful and harmonious world for all.